Hello and welcome to The Drug Trip. This channel is here to feed the curiosity of those who would like to gain an insight to the effects of various drugs and substances through user experiences and stories, with our main goal being to entertain and reduce harm and abuse. We post regular trip reports every few days, so if you do enjoy these, we would really appreciate it if you subscribed. And more importantly, we love to hear our viewers' thoughts, opinions and experiences, so please leave something for us in the comment section and we may use it in a future video. Enjoy and be safe. I was pretty new to smoking cannabis. I had done it a couple of times in high school, but it's only been in the past few months that I smoked it regularly. And by regularly, I mean approximately 3 times a week. At first, it was a sort of time-stretched feeling that I liked, and then it became more introspective, more self-examining, and an experience that I started to enjoy. However, I usually didn't like what I saw. Anyways, fast forward to a couple more weeks, and I decided that I wanted to try acid for the very first time. Took 2 hits and had a great trip. Visuals weren't too crazy, but it was definitely a mindfuck for sure. Words started to lose their meanings, and musical phrases just seemed like a valid form of communication, just as much as a verbal phrase. Anyways, my buddy tells me he's got salvia. I'd heard of it, and at that point I was really interested in trying any drug I could get my hands on. Essentially, my mindset was this: hey, I've done LSD, I can do any drug. The only drug that I knew that would be stronger than acid was DMT. I knew all drugs created different reactions in different people, but I honestly didn't expect much from salvia because 1, it was legal, 2, everyone I knew who took it told me that they thought it was like weed. Harmless enough, right? As I get to my friend's place, he tells me that he's had some crazy dreamlike trip where he was hang gliding over Kansas or something, and it scared him, so he didn't want to repeat. Hang gliding? Shit, I'll hang glide. So he gives me the pipe, fills it with salvia, lights it for me, and as I inhale, he tells me to breathe it in really deep and hold. I do as I told, and I hold the smoke in for at least 15 to 20 seconds. Led Zeppelin's No Quarter in the background. I'm ready to have a good trip. Now let me interrupt for a second. I didn't know what extract it was, and it really didn't matter in my mind. I guess what most people smoke is around 5, 10 or 20x. However, according to my friend, who got it from another friend, this was 90x. Now, I know there's some debate about extract levels and potency, but this was all I knew about salvia, and this is all I knew that I personally smoked. Needless to say, I had no clue what was in store for what would be a level 5 trip into another fucking dimension. Then out of nowhere, the second I exhaled, I felt like somebody had punched me in the face. The air left my lungs, and I was in the most vulnerable state of my entire life. For some reason, the dark texture of the salvia reminded me of poison. I suddenly felt like I had just smoked lead or something. Almost immediately, extremely venomous looking kaleidoscope patterns filled most of my vision. They were fractal shaped patterns that covered most of my vision. The only thing I could make out was the fucking phone on the table. I struggled to breathe. I could hardly speak. All I could muster was, "Get that out of here," as I pointed to the phone. Its LED screen shining through the fractal shapes. I think at that point, I didn't even know what my phone was. But for some reason, it needed to go. My friend took it and put it in another room. When he returned, I was a soulless shell. I felt the most intense feeling of déjà vu, as all sense of self died. I had been here before. Now why the fuck would I ever return? The idea of taking this drug recreationally seemed as naive, foolish and immature as anything you could ever imagine. It was like hell, honestly, in the sense that you could never have imagined something so horrifying and so evil that it really is ineffable. It's purely impossible to explain, but you're there, and you're definitely experiencing it. There is nothing in this dimension to relate it to. Quite literally, there are no words to explain what I felt other than complete and utter despair and fear. Reality just broke apart in front of me, and I was left in this fractal void. I couldn't speak. I couldn't feel any part of my body. Ideas broke down to the point where I couldn't even think for myself. The images I was seeing were more intense than I could ever have registered. So much so that the entire experience was sort of like a sensory overload, overdriven to the max. I guess my eyes were open and I was just sitting there with a stupid look in my face, but I was in a completely different dimension. I can remember a couple parts of this extremely confusing and disorienting experience, but like I said earlier, it's hard for it to be put into words. My friend asked me something like, "You tripping?" But it just kept skipping like, you trip. Suddenly, the words lost their meanings, and it became really sloppy sounding. The visuals skipped with it, and it was like everything in the room started to pull apart, and I started to see layers within everything. It was kind of like the cover of Pink Floyd's Umaguma, but everything was losing its detail and gaining new detail. The visuals were kind of like if you could imagine flying through an image, or maybe travelling through two mirrors facing each other, and just having the pattern of what you're seeing fall into itself and then reform and repeat. This sounds cool and all, but at this point, I had no clue I was under any kind of drug. I didn't know who I was or where I was. I just had this feeling, an extremely overwhelming feeling, that I had caused this disaster. I somehow did something extremely bad that caused the universe to collapse in and itself. Now this was an extremely personal experience, and I felt no connection to any other form of life. I was a prisoner in my own mind. I built reality in my own mind, and now I accidentally did something that just brought everything crashing down. It was a devastating solipsist experience. I remember the feeling that within the fractal quickly evolving matrix was a choir of cartoon-esque objects created in the kaleidoscope pattern that were singing to me about the trip, ushering me in. I remember seeing twisted pictures of my friend's face, but nothing was disjunct or cut up like a film. It was all a fluid evolution from one thing to another, but it was so complex and overwhelming that my mind could not comprehend what I was seeing. Everything was alien, nothing was real or even tangible. I could see it clearly, and yet it was somehow so intense, so bizarre, that it eluded my mind's ability to process it. Oh, and all the while, I was listening to Led Zeppelin's The Ocean, and the constant beat of Robert Plant's Ah Ah playing in the background. But I didn't remember it until weeks later under weed, listening to the same song. I felt gravity's pull, but it was pulling me sideways. I felt an extremely strong tug downwards, and this intensified as the trip became more and more intense. Suddenly, I felt like I couldn't grasp what I was seeing anymore. Not that I could before, but before I felt like I was a slave to the hallucinations. I couldn't think for myself. I couldn't reassure myself that I was on a drug. My mind was spent, completely. I felt like a vegetable who couldn't even grasp what he was seeing. Now, my mind was trying to grasp it, but it couldn't. I felt my mind desperately trying to grab at ideas, but it couldn't quite reach. This inability to grasp the trip, coupled with the unbearable pins and needles and the extreme downward pull, started to create some really strange sensations of self. But it felt like it was stretched out over the entire field of my vision. I had become the two-dimensional image of this warped and constantly moving alternate dimension. Suddenly, it began to fall apart, and I felt like I was free-falling through the picture, while I was this picture. As my field of vision was warped and reassembling and being pulled apart, I felt my own body falling apart. Now, while this was all happening, I suppose I got up, started stumbling across the room, knocked a bunch of shit over, and then fell back and almost broke my friend's table. Needless to say, all the glass pieces were knocked on the floor, and I was stumbling around like some kind of village drunk in some old Irish novel. Suddenly, I was fighting for my life, trying to climb out of the layers of reality that were falling around me. I saw my friend's girlfriend's face trying to hold me. Apparently, they were trying to subdue me for some time. But being that I was racing for my life in another dimension, falling to my death through millions of layers of reality, it was a little hard to get through to me. But the second I saw her face, I suddenly realised that I was human and that I had taken a drug, even that I was a sentient being. All of that went out the window, with just a little bit of some good old salvia. My only instinct was to attempt to climb out of this racing, descending, swirling, fractal picture. I was drenched in sweat, to the point where my clothes were dripping. My heart was racing at 1,000 beats per minute, and I could hardly speak as my friends placed me in a chair, asking me what I saw. I told them to give me a minute to regain my composure. Much of the room was destroyed, but I was surprised that the whole room wasn't completely destroyed, because I felt like I must have been clawing away at reality, desperately trying to escape from my personal hell. The only way I can honestly describe how I felt falling was down and to the right. The three-dimensional world fell apart, and I could only perceive things in a two-dimensional light. Jesus Christ, my entire perception of reality was annihilated under this drug. The term ego death doesn't even come close to what I felt. But there was nothing to be gained from where I was. It was pure insanity, to the 9th degree. I had gone in expecting some kind of spiritual experience or something meaningful that I could come away with, but there was none of that in Salvia land. This was pure, unfiltered madness, to a degree that I wouldn't wish on anybody. So this was where I started having problems. Right when I came back from my Salvia trip, my friends let me lie down and watch a movie with them. I was shaking so hard. I just wanted to lay down and sleep. They encouraged me to smoke a bowl. I felt like I was midway through an acid trip, and the weed just made it stronger. As we watched the film, I felt like the people on the screen were really strange looking, and as we ate some food, I felt myself falling back into the salvia. Not in the sense that I saw visuals, but my mind was falling back into that strange place. The next couple of times that I smoked weed were similar. Intense flashbacks to the salvia, to the point where it truly disturbed me. Then one day, another friend smoked me out with some hash as he smokes daily. Suddenly, I had acid-like thoughts, and I had to backtrack just to realise that I was in the room with him. Time to go, I thought. I went back to my car, but it was too strong to drive. I could barely talk thanks to the cotton mouth. I tried calling a friend, but could barely communicate. Since then, I've been getting stronger and stronger reactions to weed. When I first started smoking after salvia, for the first couple of weeks, I would feel the salvia sensation, extreme pins and needles, and I would feel like I was being pulled downwards. I could play with my depth perception, but sometimes if I stared at something too long, I got the sensation that there was no depth perception, that I was looking at a two-dimensional image that covered my entire field of vision, and then I could see little parts of that image moving and falling apart, like a much less intense version of what went down on my trip. People's faces also seem to be hovering over their face. When I'm stoned around my friend, who is my trip sitter, if I look at him directly in the face, the rest of the room creates this kind of tunnel effect that leads straight to his face. Another thing I think I remember feeling under salvia, but I'm not quite sure I remember it. Pictures start to dance just like the low-level acid trip. Calling it strange is a more than colossal understatement. Weed has been taking me to this weird, twisted version of the normal world, something that it never used to do. When I'm sober, floaters and white specks really dominate my vision. It gets kind of distracting when I look up at the sky. The reason I'm putting this out there is because the day before yesterday was the worst. I felt anxiety and fear unlike anything I've ever felt in my life. I started to question my own reality. The way objects look on weed began to look extremely disturbing. People started looking disturbingly alien. I felt as if I was realising something humans that aren't supposed to realise. I was beginning to see things working behind the scenes, and it was frightening as hell. It's kind of like that splinter in your mind that really isn't what you've always thought it to be, and now that you know the truth, it will haunt you forever. I have trouble even relating to my memories, my past, my identity, who I thought I was and who I wanted to be. For the first time in my life, I feel afraid. Of what? I have no idea. But it's this feeling, it's deep within me, I think I might have to stop all drugs for good if I ever want to feel normal again. It's depersonalisation and derealisation to a degree that really frightens me. I've never felt so alien. I never knew anyone could feel so alien and alone. I never felt much emotion throughout my entire life, never was afraid of much, never cried over anything, never was very emotionally attached to anybody or anything. But now, I'm scared of something that I can't even put into words. And I've broken down a couple of times trying to explain it to people. Difficult experience is right. My biggest fear now is that when I'm not feeling this intense and overwhelming panic, I can't even relate to it in the slightest bit. And all that's on my mind is, I feel fine. Hey, I'm ready to do some more drugs.